Picture this. Summer in Ogden, Utah, hot pavement, chlorine in the air, and kids racing up a hill to throw themselves down fiberglass water slides. For a lot of people in the 80s and 90s, Wild Waters was the place to be. But behind the sunburns, scraped knees, and chaotic summer memories is a much darker history. One involving a 14-year-old boy, a 93-foot drain pipe, a slide that separated while kids were riding it, criminal charges, and a park that eventually disappeared. Today, we are diving into the history of Wild Waters in Ogden, Utah. Welcome back to Death Kiss Traveler. I'm your morbidly curious host, Marissa. What a month. Before we jump in, I just want to say thank you. This last month has been absolutely incredible, and I've been hitting goals with the show that honestly I wasn't sure I'd reach this soon or at all. Every follow, share, comment, and listen is really helping Death Kiss Traveler grow, and I'm so excited to see where it goes next. I have big plans for the future. I'm starting to have guests on my show, which is really exciting. So if you're enjoying the show, make sure you follow Death Kiss Traveler on Instagram and TikTok. And make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you are listening to this podcast. It really helps me so much. Now, my friends, you bagged your towel, your copper tone SPF 4, because apparently we're all trying to cook ourselves in the 80s. And let's head to Wild Waters in Ogden, Utah. Before Wild Waters became the subject of accident investigations, newspaper stories, and decades of local rumors, it was something much simpler. It was summer entertainment. And if you grew up anywhere around Ogden in the 80s or 90s, there was a pretty good chance the name Wild Waters meant something to you. But to understand why this relatively small water park appeared in Ogden in the first place, we have to go back in time to when the modern American water park was still fairly a new idea. By the late 70s and early 80s, fiberglass water slides were beginning to change the way Americans thought about swimming pools. Instead of simply just jumping into a municipal pool, families could suddenly climb towers, shoot through twisting fiberglass flumes, and spend an entire day at attractions built around water. Utah jumped onto this trend surprisingly early, considering they only have warm weather about 3 months out of the year. According to the Lagoon History Project, a 30-foot water slide called Kamikaze at Saratoga, near Utah Lake, was one of the earliest modern fiberglass water slides. Then in 1979, Wild Waves opened in the Glendale area of Salt Lake City, and with that was only one of 3 wave pools built anywhere in the entire world. Then came Cherry Hill in Kaysville, and they added 2 flume slides in 1980, and throughout the early 1980s, smaller water slide operations began appearing along the Wasatch Front. Utah was becoming a water park state, and right in the middle of that growth came a company you probably would not associate with water slides. It's Flying J. Yes, that Flying J, the truck stops. Flying J was a Utah company founded by entrepreneur O.J. Call. Call had grown up around the gasoline business and incorporated Flying J in 1968. During the 1970s, he expanded beyond gas stations into other ventures, including land development, restaurants, and even hotels. Then in 1979, Flying J opened its first interstate travel plaza in Ogden. It wasn't just a gas station anymore. The concept was combined with fuel and amenities for travelers and professional drivers, including a restaurant, lodging, showers, laundry facilities, and other services. The idea worked, and Flying J began rapidly expanding. 5 years later, Flying J was involved in something considerably wetter. In 1984, Flying J's Wild Waters opened in Ogden, Utah. The Flying J connection isn't just something people have remembered incorrectly over the years. The Lagoon History Project specifically identifies the attraction as Flying J's Wild Waters. And I found an industry portfolio from water slide company Waterfund Products, and they list Flying J, Wild Waters, in Ogden, Utah, among its clients. There was also another Flying J Wild Waters associated with North Salt Lake, according to the Lagoon History Project. So this wasn't simply someone opening a couple of slides behind a neighborhood swimming pool. Wild Waters was part of an actual business venture at exactly the moment Utah's water park industry was starting to take off. People who remember the park describe seeing it from the I-15, and the site would become one of those landmarks that northern Utah residents recognized while driving through the area. So there is a rumor that Wild Waters was built on old Native American burial grounds. I went looking for evidence of that, and I could not find any. Interestingly, Ogden does have a documented historic site called Mound Fort, where an early pioneer fort was reportedly built over a native burial mound. But Mound Fort was several streets north and east of Wild Waters, so unless new archaeological or land records resurface, the idea that Wild Waters itself sat on burial grounds belongs in the local legend category, not the factual history category. Okay, now here's where I want to be careful because there's a lot of memories online about what Wild Waters looked like and what it was. And on my social media posts, there seems to be a mix of everything. People even confuse this park with other ones. But people do remember the giant straight slides, or they remember the tube rides. They remember a ride called River Run. They remember food, crowds, climbing hills, and carrying tubes. I was told they had the very best French fries in all of Utah. Some people remember practically living there during the summer. Someone commented and said,
"That park was dope, even if it was deadly. I remember rolling in there from California at 13 in 1991. DePeccy mode blaring, smell of Tropicana tanning oil in the air, hottie lifeguards eating popsicles. Hell yeah."
Spent many a summer days at Wild Waters growing up. My mom once flashed the entire water park when a bee flew down her swimsuit.
By the summer of 1985, Wild Waters had 6 water slides. All 6 emptied their water into a common receiving or splash pool. That pool was approximately 4 feet deep, and the water from the slides was collected and sent through a recirculation system before being pumped back up to the top of the attractions. This was a multi-slide water amusement park built around a significant recirculating water system. And another fascinating detail is that the CDC has reported Wild Waters was the 7th water slide park designed by the company responsible for its design. The CDC only identifies that designer as a company located in Washington state. It does not name the firm that built it in the published report. But even more importantly, investigators later determined that the design of the water slides met all of the applicable local and state standards when the park opened in 1984. And I want you to remember that fact because it's going to become extremely important later. Wild Waters wasn't some completely unregulated homemade attraction operating outside the system. When it opened, its design had passed the standards that existed, and it was entering a Utah recreation market that was getting competitive real fast. This wasn't an attraction that opened in 1984 and disappeared a season later. Water parks weren't a novelty anymore, they were business. And Wild Waters had been near the beginning of that boom. There's something else I find interesting when researching Wild Waters. For a park that so many northern Utah residents remember, surprisingly little of its earliest promotional materials or a lot of information, it's not very verifiable. I can find memories and photographs and government investigations, newspaper coverage, but I could not find a trustworthy digitalized 1984 Wild Waters rate sheet. I cannot tell you how much it cost for an adult or a child to go and swim there, which is kind of foreshadowing this entire park. But almost exactly 1 year after Wild Waters opened, something happened inside one of those splash pools that would change the history of the park forever. On Friday, August 16, 1985, Wild Waters became the scene of an accident so unusual that it would eventually be documented by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And because the CDC investigated and published a detailed report on the case, We actually know a remarkable amount about what happened. The federal report does not identify the victim by name, but we know him as Troy Witten. The report describes him simply as a 14-year-old boy, 5 feet 2 inches and weighing 134 pounds. But he's so much more than that. I have learned from his friends and cousins that he was a remarkable teenager. And he went with his younger brother and 2 friends on his birthday. They were playing in one of Wild Water's slide receiving pools, and they called it the splash pool. The water was only 4 feet deep, but nothing about that sounds particularly dangerous. But hidden beneath the water along one side of that pool was the entrance to Wild Water's recirculation system. And that system is extremely important to understand what happens next. Wild Waters, it has 6 slides. Water from all 6 eventually drained into that splash pool where the boys were playing. From there, the water needed to be moved back through the system so it could be sent to the top of all of the slides and used again. To accomplish that, Wild Waters had 3 large pipes built into the side of the splash pool. Each pipe was approximately 12.5 inches in diameter. These were PVC pipes. The openings were sitting promptly out in the middle of the pool. According to the CDC, they were located beneath a recessed overhang along the side of the pool. Water entered those pipes and traveled by gravity toward the pump house. From the pump house, it could be then pumped back up to the top of the slides. And these weren't small swimming pool drains. The CDC would later specifically describe the drainage pipes at the Ogden Park as unusually large. And there was a reason for that. 6 slides meant a large amount of water had to be recirculated through the system. But the size of those pipes also created a danger that was about to become catastrophically clear. According to the CDC, Troy was holding on to the edge of the pool. His feet were dangling over the submerged drainage pipe, and he was letting his body get sucked in and then he'd pull himself back out. In my social media posts about this park, I had other people comment saying that they did the same thing. They would let their body get sucked in, their arms, their legs, and then pull themselves back out. But unfortunately, he let himself get sucked in, and then he let go. And he disappeared into the pipe. Think about the dimensions for a second. The boy was 5 feet 2 inches tall. The opening was only about 12.5 inches across. Yet it's large enough for his body to enter it. Once inside, the flow of water carried him through the drainage system. He traveled horizontally through that pipe for 93 feet. That's roughly the length of a basketball court. At the end of that horizontal section, the pipe reached the pump house and made a 90-degree vertical turn. That's where his body became lodged. The CDC published report actually includes a schematic of the system. It shows the splash pool on one side, the uncovered drain opening, the long 93-foot pipe running underground toward the pump house, and then the 90-degree L turn. Beside that are the words, "Body extracted here." The boy had vanished beneath only 4 feet of water. He wasn't in the pool anymore. He was somewhere inside the park's underground water system. It took approximately 15 minutes to locate him. He was found lodged at that bend inside the pump house. Resuscitation was attempted. It was unsuccessful. An autopsy later determined that Troy died from drowning. And if the story ended there, this could perhaps be described as a horrific and extremely unusual accident. But the investigators started examining the drain, and what they discovered completely changes the story. Those 3 12.5-inch openings had not originally been designed to completely open. They had been fitted with cast iron grates. Those grates were supposed to cover the entrances to the pipes and prevent someone from entering them. By August 16, 1985, the grates were gone. And investigators learned that they hadn't simply broken off that day of the accident. According to employees interviewed during the investigation, there had already been an ongoing problem with them earlier that summer. The the CDC employees reported that the cast iron grates repeatedly fell off during the early part of the 1985 season. Why? The cement surrounding the anchoring system had eroded, the screws were coming out, and once that happened, it could no longer adequately hold the screws securing the grates. The grates kept coming loose, and eventually they were removed. I can only imagine why they were removed. Back then, I'm sure that kids would pull them out and play with them, throw them around. It was probably a huge safety risk having 12-inch metal discs inside your pool. Is that a bigger risk than having an open drain pipe? This statement doesn't come from rumor or someone's memory decades later. It is in the CDC's published investigation. As a result, the grates were removed. And there's another major problem. Once those grates were removed, investigators found no secondary design feature that would prevent someone from entering those drain pipes. No backup barrier. No secondary entrapment prevention system. An opening approximately 12.5 inches across was simply accessible beneath the surface of the splash pool. And this is where the Wild Waters case gets complicated, because investigators did not conclude that the park had originally been constructed illegally. Wild Waters had been built only the year before in 1984. According to the CDC, it was the 7th waterslide park designed by the company located in Washington state. The federal report doesn't name that company, but it does tell us something very important. When Wild Waters opened in 1984, its design met the existing local and state standards. So you have this strange situation. A water park can meet the applicable standards when it opened and still contain a drainage system capable of allowing a child to enter a pipe large enough to carry him underground 93 feet. And we're not just talking about a child. This is a 14-year-old boy. That distinction matters because there really are two separate issues in this case. There is the design of the system, and then there's the maintenance and operation of the system after it opened. The design had passed the standards that existed in 1984, but the CDC found that in the summer of 1985, those grates, they were gone. And the CDC added another extremely important sentence. The park performed no routine checks of safety items. There were lifeguards working there when the boy died. The CDC specifically said that, but a lifeguard watching swimmers on the surface of the pool could not replace an engineered barrier over a drainage pipe beneath the water. And after this death, investigators started looking beyond what happened to this one boy. They began looking at whether the entire drainage system needed to change. The investigation was led by the Weber Morgan District Health Department. Other agencies and officials involved in reporting the case included Weber County Building Inspection, personnel of the Sheriff's Department, the Weber County Attorney's Office, the Utah Department of Health and Safety, and eventually the CDC's Division of Injury, Epidemiology, and Control. The health department ultimately made 3 major recommendations. First, any drainage pipe more than 6 inches in diameter should have a protective grating and a backup entrapment prevention feature, with those protections approved by the health department before installation. Think about that compared with Wild Waters. Its pipes were approximately 12.5 inches. That is more than double the 6-inch threshold. Number 2, drain grates need to be attached using a corrosion-resistant and secure anchoring system, and they need to be installed in a way that prevented swimmers from removing them. That recommendation directly addressed what investigators had discovered at Wild Waters. The cement had been deteriorating, the anchoring screws were no longer being held properly, and the grates, they came off. And third, facilities should maintain a written record documenting the monitoring of pool safety features. In other words, don't simply assume the protective equipment is still where it was yesterday. Check it. Document that you checked it. The CDC published its report on the Wild Waters death in the July 4th, 1986 edition of the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, commonly called the MMWR. Did you know that even existed? And in that editorial accompanying the case, federal investigators put what happened into Ogden into a much larger context. According to the Consumer Product Safety Commission, this was only the third reported death associated with a waterslide amusement park at the time. One of the previous deaths was disturbingly similar. In 1980, a 13-year-old boy had become trapped in a pool drain measuring approximately 8 by 24 inches. Another reported waterslide death involved a 35-year-old man who fell from a corkscrew section of a slide. The CDC noted that most waterslide splash pools' drainage openings were too small for a person's body to enter. Wild Waters was just different. Because of the amount of water being recirculated for the 6 slides, the Ogden Park used those unusually large drain pipes. But investigators were also discovering that drain entrapment wasn't limited to water parks. Between 1983 and the time of the report, the Consumer Product Safety Commission had reports of 10 serious injuries and 3 deaths associated with swimming pool or hot tub drainage systems. I actually remember this as a child. Maybe it's because I lived in California. We had a swimming pool and a hot tub. We always had to keep our hair up and stay away from the drain pipes. Maybe it's just me. I vaguely remember this as a child. So every one of those 13 incidents involved a child that were 14 years or younger. And in 6 of the incidents, the drain cover had been removed. Across all 13 cases, the CDC reported that suction holding a child against its drain opening or hair becoming entangled in the drainage system was the primary mechanism of injury. That's why the Wild Waters case is more significant than simply being a dark piece in Ogden's history. It became part of a national warning about something that the recreation industry hadn't really addressed: drain entrapment. Today, an uncovered drain opening large enough for a child's body to enter sounds impossible, right? But water parks were expanding quickly during this period. Water slides, they were getting bigger. Pumps were moving larger volumes of water. Pools were being designed specifically to feed entire networks of attractions, and safety standards, well, they were just trying to keep up. The CDC's conclusion was very clear. You have to cover the drain at all times. The agency also called for state and local governments to adopt better safety standards for water slides, swimming pools, spas, hot tubs, particularly standards designed to prevent that entrapment. Wild Waters was investigated after Troy's death, but I've not found documentation showing whether the entire park remained closed for the rest of the 1985 season. Honestly, it doesn't look like it from my research. The drains were fixed and it was open for business. The investigation into Troy's death didn't end with new safety recommendations. About a month after the accident, the case became criminal. In September of 1985, the Associated Press reported that the owner of Wild Waters Waterslide Park had been charged with negligent homicide in connection to the death of the 14-year-old Troy Whitten. That's an important distinction because he was charged. That doesn't mean he was convicted. The charge meant prosecutors believed Troy's death warranted criminal scrutiny following the discovery that the protective grates had been removed. However, I have not been able to locate a reliable surviving court record showing the ultimate outcome of that negligent homicide charge, whether it was dismissed, resolved through a plea, or it went to trial. I honestly cannot tell you. I have dug and dug and dug. So what I can tell you with confidence is Troy's death wasn't treated simply as an unavoidable water park accident. The owner of Wild Waters was criminally charged with negligent homicide. But that's it. Although later local accounts do mention a lawsuit, I have not been able to verify a civil wrongful death case in contemporary records. And I've looked, I promise I've looked. Some people have gotten pretty angry when I don't have all of the answers, but I can tell you, if you can find this, send it over to me. I would love to see it. The park did not disappear after this accident happened. Wild Waters continued operating. Years passed, families came back, kids continued to climb those slide towers. And if this had been the only serious incident connected to Wild Waters, maybe the story would have ended here. But it didn't. The park continued operating through the rest of the 1980s and into the 1990s. And 7 years after the fatal drain accident, another group of children would be injured there. This time, the problem wasn't beneath the water. It was the slide itself. July 21st, 1992. It was a Tuesday afternoon. An 11-year-old boy named Lloyd Roberts was riding one of the water slides at Wild Waters. According to an Associated Press report published by the Deseret News, while Lloyd was coming down the slide, a section of the slide separated. At that point of the slide, it raised up and Lloyd collided with the structure. The impact was severe. The news reports say he broke both of his legs. Lloyd actually commented on my Instagram, and here is his quote.
I am the boy that the news reported broke both his legs. In reality, in 1992, I went down the right side tall white water slide named Double Trouble, and it ripped off my left foot at the ankle as well as snapped my left femur in half. 1 year later, I got the last pin, bolt, screw, plate, and staple removed along with the cast. I remember that day well. It was the last day the water park was open. This accident was 36 years ago. Crazy.
And Lloyd wasn't the only child hurt. According to the same report, 4 other children had gone down the slide shortly before him. They suffered cuts and scrapes. Those children were taken to McCady Hospital, treated and released. Lloyd's injuries were considerably more serious. He remained hospitalized and was later released. In total, the report documents 5 children injured in the incident. How could 5 children get hurt? One statement from Wild Waters' manager helped explain how quickly riders were moving through the attraction. The park manager at the time was Kathy Allen. Allen told reporters that children were being sent down the slide approximately every 10 to 15 seconds. That's really fast. That means there wasn't much time between riders. According to Allen, by the time the park employees first became aware that something was wrong, the lifeguards were already moving toward the attraction to close it. The slide was shut down, and Wild Waters management said that it would remain closed. The newspaper report says 4 other injured children had gone down the slide moments before Lloyd. So from my research, it sounds like with every kid going down, the slide portion was getting lower and lower and lower until he went down feet first and smashed both of his legs. Multiple children encountered the damaged area during a relatively short period before the attraction could even be shut down. And once again, the agency investigating an accident at Wild Waters was the Weber Morgan Health Department. Its director at the time was Mark Nichols, and Nichols made a significant preliminary statement about what investigators were seeing. According to the Associated Press report, Nichols said it appeared that the injuries were caused by inadequate structural design. He wasn't saying that it was a rider error. He wasn't saying that a child had broken the slide by misusing it, and he wasn't characterizing it as an unavoidable fluke. The director of the health department investigating the accident was pointing toward the structure itself. This is what makes Wild Waters particularly interesting from a safety history perspective. The 2 serious accidents we can firmly document were not repetitions of the same problem. If you talk to people from northern Utah who remember Wild Waters, you hear stories, a lot of stories. Some are harmless, some remember spending entire days there, and there is one graphic story that continues to be told, and it's not for the faint of heart. I have had employees confirm this, even though it's not reported on. According to the story, a teenage boy placed his genitals against a suction opening in the pool, and he suffered a severe injury involving his foreskin. Employees were responsible for retrieving the foreskin from the filtration system for paramedics. That is an absolutely horrifying story. There is no contemporary newspaper reports attached to it. There's no health department document or even a police report, just employees sharing this story. So did it happen? Possibly. Suction-related injuries at pools are absolutely real, and we've discussed it. This park had an issue with that. Federal investigators were already documenting severe and fatal drain entrapment injuries around the country during this era. And employees have confirmed this story, so I'm going to put this in it's probably true. One thing that did come through loud and clear in the comments on my Instagram and TikTok is that Wild Waters had a reputation for being rough. People who went in there in the 1980s and 90s described a place where the rules sometimes felt non-existent, and getting banged up was practically part of the experience. Commenters remember leaving with cuts, scrapes, and bruises, broken toes, broken noses, concussions on the Hawaiian-style slides, and people actually falling off slides. One person said they left the park injured almost every single time they went, while another remembered having a tooth knocked out. Others talked about brutal sunburns and even sun poisoning after spending an entire day exposed to Utah's summer sun. The overall tone of the memories is almost comical now, like everyone collectively looks back and says, "How did we survive this place?" Of course, these are personal recollections from former visitors, not official accident reports. I wish I could find their official accident report forms, if they even had that back then. I wouldn't trade every story as independently verified, but when dozens of people are describing the same kind of chaotic, scraped up, no fear experience, it tells you something about the culture of the park. People really were built different in the 80s and 90s, or maybe we just had a much higher tolerance for questionable water park decisions. And where were our parents? On May 25th, 1990, the Deseret News published a story about the increasingly competitive water park industry along the Wasatch Front. The newspaper identified three major players. You had Raging Waters, Laguna Beach, and Seven Peaks. But it also specifically named several smaller competitors, including Wild Waters in Ogden. So 6 years after Wild Waters opened and 5 years after a fatal drain accident, it was still operating and competing for customers. And competition, well, it was getting considerably tougher. When Wild Waters opened in '84, Utah's modern water park industry was relatively young. By the 1990s, that had changed. Lagoon had invested about $6 million to convert its historic swimming area into Laguna Beach. Seven Peaks had opened in Provo, Raging Waters was expanding, water parks were becoming bigger, more elaborate, and more expensive to operate. Wild Waters was no longer one of a handful of unusual fiberglass slide attractions. It was now competing against dedicated destination water parks. I never lived in Utah while this park was open, but when we would visit, we were not going here, we were going to places like Lagoon. And if you ask longtime Ogden residents about this place, things get a little confusing. Some remember Wild Waters, some remember Holiday Island, and then it becomes Fun City, USA. Later, local memories and old map databases place Holiday Island Event Park near the same I-15 21st Street area where Wild Waters operated. People remember the water slides still being there, but they also remember something new: go-karts. So at some point, the property appears to have evolved from a straightforward water park into more of a small amusement park. Unfortunately, this is also where the paper trail gets real messy. I still haven't found that perfect old newspaper ad saying, Wild Waters is now Holiday Island, or now Holiday Island is Fun City, USA. I actually have not found a reliable date of when Wild Waters officially closed or when Holiday Island took over. As far as my research goes, Wild Waters appears to have finally closed because of a combination of safety problems, financial struggles, ownership changes, and operational issues. The 1992 slide accident certainly didn't help. In its later years, the park reportedly changed hands and was eventually renamed Fun City, USA. That was the final name, but former employees and visitors have also claimed that the final ownership struggled financially, that some teenage employees and lifeguards weren't paid their final checks, and that lawsuits and mounting debts contributed to the collapse. Based on the accounts that I've found, the final owner eventually filed for bankruptcy, and the park appears to have permanently closed around 1998. I like to give you all the factual details. But because this park is old, and records from these final years are so hard to find, I'm going to finish this by saying, as far as my research goes, some of these details actually come from people who worked there or visited the park rather than surviving official records. So take it for what it's worth. After closing, the property sat abandoned for years. The slides deteriorated on the hillside, the land was eventually leveled, and by the early 2000s, the area had transitioned into an automotive salvage and auction site. So Wild Waters didn't necessarily have one dramatic final day. It seemed to have slowly unraveled accidents, changing owners, financial trouble, rebranding, bankruptcy, and eventually abandonment. I was told that kids would ride their skateboards down the abandoned slides, which I love the 90s. Good for you. Because this park, it relied heavily on elevation. So instead of constructing enormous steel towers for every attraction, the hill could just be incorporated into the design, allowing slides to descend naturally towards the splash pools, perfect for a skateboard. After the amusement property disappeared, that terrain was substantially altered. I was also told that after the slides were removed, for a short time, it was a motorcycle track. So if someone remembers seeing giant water slides running down a hill from the I-15 and then visits there today, the geography doesn't necessarily look the way their memory would say it should. Much of what visually defined the old park no longer exists. By 2003, the water park was gone. That year, Insurance Auto Auctions entered the Utah market by purchasing an existing Ogden business called Mountain States Salvage Pool, which operated on roughly 22 acres in this same area. So the property's later history appears to go something like this: Wild Waters, Holiday Island, Fun USA, Mountainside Salvage Pool, Insurance Auto Auctions. And by 2015, property records connected to the site with PC Thomas Investments, while Insurance Auto Auctions was operating there under a long-term lease. So whatever remained of the water park, it disappeared way before the auto auction took over. So why'd this park get lost? It wasn't a big park. Think about Lagoon. Lagoon still exists, so we know about it. We hear about it every day. You see advertisements. Raging Waters in Salt Lake survived through several names and owners. When it finally closed, there was an extensive public discussion over what to do with the property. Seven Peaks is still remembered because it operated into the modern internet era. But Wild Waters disappeared before every business had a website, before social media, before people carried cameras in their pockets everywhere they went. A huge account of its history exists in fragments. You have a federal accident investigation, a couple newspaper clippings, an industry client list, a handful of photographs, old map entries, and memories from people who spent their summers there. That's why researching it feels almost archaeological. I'm reconstructing a place that physically vanished. It wasn't Disney, it's not Wet and Wild. It wasn't even one of Utah's largest water parks by the 1990s, but something that happened in that little Ogden park became part of the national conversation about water safety. Honestly, there's something strangely fitting about the fact that so little of Wild Waters remains. Because when most people remember a childhood water park, they don't remember engineering diagrams. They don't remember drain diameters or health department regulations. They just remember being kids that remember hot concrete burning their feet, the chlorine, the tubes, the stairs that feel so tall. The moment that you sat on top of one of those slides and you pushed yourself forward. And that feeling that summer was going to last forever. For thousands of northern Utah kids, Wild Waters was exactly that. Just a summer memory. And so many people commented saying that they forgot all about this park, but it was one of their favorite childhood places to go. And so underneath all of those memories is another history, one involving a 93-foot underground pipe, safety equipment that had been removed, a federal investigation, a slide that separated beneath riders, and a water park that eventually vanished so completely that today people argue online about exactly where it even stood. Wild Waters opened in Ogden in 1984. For years, families came there to escape Utah heat, and then slowly, Wild Waters disappeared. The slides are gone, the pools are gone, even the landscape has changed, but the story is still there. And now, so are the names of the incidents that history almost forgot. That's Wild Waters. For most people, Wild Waters is remembered as one of the wildest places to spend a Utah summer. For others, it's where they got their first concussion, broke a toe, lost a tooth, or somehow survived the 80s. But underneath all of those funny memories is a very real safety story, one that ended up becoming much of a bigger national conversation about how water parks and pools protect the people inside them. And that's the story of Wild Waters. One part summer nostalgia, one part summer chaos, and one part history that almost disappeared. Get ready for next week because we're leaving Ogden behind. Not too far, just a couple towns over, but the next destination has a dark history all its own. Until then, stay curious, stay a little spooky, and I'll see you at the next episode of Death Kiss Traveler. This podcast is written, researched, and recorded by me, Marissa. Produced by Sunkissed Traveler, the travel agency that takes the stress out of planning a vacation. Wherever you want to go, a Caribbean cruise? How about a ski trip to Utah? Sunkissed Traveler can help. See show notes for details